We are in my sewing room about to break down all these different looks and embellishments for the vintage curves pattern. This is such a fun, versatile pattern that can take a wide range of materials. All of these materials became a vintage curves garment, all the way from a delicate lace spring heirloom look, and oh gosh, look at little Everly there, to some wool and corduroy fall and winter looks and everything in between. Regardless of the direction or garment you're creating, you'll begin with the bodice. Join the bodice together using the bodice ring method, going front, back, sewing together at the shoulder seams. It's like a little ring, get it? A bodice ring method, front, back. Now, if you are doing a lace or heirloom version, you may want to join the shoulder seams together with some entredot, and I do have another video that shows how to insert entredot into a seam. Then iron all those shoulder seams open. You'll see this bodice ring method comes together when you take the lining front and fold it on top of the garment's front piece. And the two back pieces fold in half, and voila, you have the structure of your bodice. So from there, you can create a collar if you wish. There are two collar shapes included in my vintage curves pattern, one Peter Pan collar and another V-shaped one. To construct the Peter Pan collar, you can apply some mini piping if you wish, or some narrow lace edging. If you go this route, you may want to subtract the width of your embellishment from the collar's perimeter, if you will. There is like a 1-inch overlap for the center back, so there is some wiggle room unless you introduce something, like a 1/2-inch wide lacing edging. You get my drift? I hope so. Let me know if you have any questions down in the comments below. So if you place some lace around the collar, you may not need to line it. But in the case of piping and other embellishments, put a piece right sides together with your collar so you can line it. I like to sew with the previous stitches facing up so I can go right on top or even like a 1/16 of an inch inside the previous stitches to ensure a clean transition. From there, clip the curves as necessary and turn the collar right sides out. Now, one final thing you can do for the Peter Pan collar is to baste together the center front to avoid having a gap. Just align the collars together and place a wide, easy to remove zigzag between the two. It makes life a lot easier in the future steps. When it comes to that V-shaped collar, a similar process can be followed with some tricks to keep things nice and clean. So first thing, trimming up your piping's width down to a 1/4 inch can help with both collars since the seam allowance here is a 1/4 inch. So from there, I applied the piping starting at one back, going, down that back, around the corner, and a trick here is to place a little clip in the piping so it can turn that corner and not, turn into a hot mess in a hurry. So then you'll put your needle down, pick up your presser foot, and turn your corner to carry on. When I get to that other center V part, I place another clip to allow the piping to bend, and once again, needle down, presser foot up, and turn the corner to carry on. And I keep doing this until I get to the other back, going up the back, and then that is all done with the piping. So another trick that's really good in many piping applications is to remove the first 1/2 inch or so of the cording. And this is a good trick when there's another seam that's going to go over top of that cording since it'll reduce the bulk in that seam. Once again, if you use lace edging here, you'll probably won't need to line your collar. But in the situation of piping, a lining is quite needed. So if you made a collar, or maybe you have some other embellishment trim piece that you want to work around the neckline, place that to the garment side of your bodice now. I pin the center front first, like the center front of the collar to the center front of the bodice, and then work my way around pinning the collar into place. And then I take that assembly to my machine and stitch the collar to the garment side of the bodice only. The lining side of the bodice will stay out of this step. Continuing on with the bodice construction, whether you have made a collar or not, is folding the lining front to meet the garment front. There is another way to construct the bodice, and I went that way with the lace route, and that is some bonus content construction that I will get into at the end of the video. Anywho, so for now, put those fronts right sides together, making sure to line up the shoulder seams and sew around the neckline. And I am so sorry that my big old head got in the way here. I had no idea. And here we are. But yeah, so just sew from one center back around the neckline to the other center back. Then clip the curves around the neckline, and this step may be tempting to skip, but don't. Understitch. Put all the seams towards the lining side of your bodice. Go as far back into that back bodice, but don't stress about it. You don't need to go all the way back into there. You won't be able to, actually. And then stitch around the entire neckline until you can't go any further on the other side of that back bodice. So yes, understitch. If you're tempted to skip that step, then I urge you to get it from your machine, because I'm thinking you might need a break. You might not be of sound of mind. Don't worry, I have been there. Just take a break. So there you go. Push all the corners of your bodice, press all of that out, and remove any basting stitching you may have, and voila, your bodice is together. If you want to attach some piping or another trim embellishment, then place that at the bottom of your bodice, going from one side of the garment all the way to the other side. And now we can move on to those armholes. There are endless ways to embellish the hem of the sleeve, if you will. The design kind of has these cap sleeves built into the bodice. And for this lilac look, I use a combination of piping with this edging trim. I gathered up the edging trim to my liking and sewed it to my piping, and then took that combination and sewed it to my sleeve. From there, I made sure the edging trim was pressed and faced away from the sleeve, if that makes sense, and then sewed the side seam of the sleeve together. I'm just doing right sides together. There will be 2 side seams per sleeve, one for the garment and one for the lining. And this is a little tricky part of the pattern, but there are 2 methods to finishing the bottom of the sleeve. The first method is easier. It's just folding up the raw edge of the lining sleeve and pinning that to the garment sleeve. And from there, you can either top stitch the folded edge into place or hand stitch it into place. Either way, that'll give you a finished edge to the sleeve. Now, method 2 is a little bit more tricky, but you can do it. And I personally think it's a little bit of a cleaner look. So you'll put the 2 sleeves together how they should be your end result, right? The 2 right sides together, and put those raw edges together as if they were all sewn together, and then pinching it in place and twisting it out so you can sew around, joining the 2 together in a seam. In most cases, you'll be able to go around the entire perimeter of the sleeve, but with this edging trim that I have, I skipped over that part, and I will hand sew that down later on. All right, now we've completed one of the 2 tricky steps of this pattern. You have got this. Let it soldier on, all right? So moving on to the bottoms, and I'm just going to say bottoms because the overall process is going to be the same whether you're doing the skirt, bubble, or romper. So yeah, bottoms. Transfer the pleating and gathering line to your fabric. This line is a rough kind of ballpark guideline, and I will explain more as we dive into this part of the construction. Now, if you're gathering up your bottoms, go ahead and put a placket into the back. And now there's instructions given on how to do a placket later on in the video. I also have a standalone how to do a placket video on my channel. So once you have your placket in there, then just gather up the top edge, one gathering thread on either side of where those permanent stitches are going to go for the waist seam. If you are pleating your bottoms, then roll the front of your bottom on a dowel and send that through your pleater. How many rows to pleat is really up to you, but I went with 9 half-space rows, and the top and bottom of those rows are going to be used as holding rows, so I'm only going to smock 9 for this sweet blouse number. So yes, the top of these bottoms curves here and there. Hello, it's called the Vintage Curves pattern, but you can pleat it quite easily. Just focus on one pleating notch and angle your fabric on the dowel as necessary. But please be careful, do not pull on the fabric. Just move the dowel horizontally, like parallel to those pleating rows. No pulling here, okay? Pulling can cause the pleats to form unevenly. You'll have like more on top or the bottom or whichever way you pulled, and you can also pull your fabric out of whack. And here is a little tip. Go ahead and roll up the back of your bottoms and run that through your pleater directly behind the front of your bottoms. This way you won't have to rethread your needles, just one right after the other. I know. You're welcome. When I learned that, my mind was blown. So once you have those pieces pleated, then pull out one side of the pleating threads around that mark from the pattern. Just pull the closest to the mark. It does not have to be precise. For the back of the bottoms, tie off those threads in groups of 2s or 3s, keeping those knots at the end of the pleating threads so you still have some thread to work with. You'll pull up the pleating threads at the center back, cut them and pull them out on either side, which will allow you to put in a placket. I'm not ready to block those pleats just yet, so I will pull on those pleating threads so the knots are flush with the fabric. Does that make sense? And now I don't have to worry about losing any of those pleating threads and consequently those pleats. So to put in a placket at the back, I grab a piece of scrap fabric that is extra long and put that right side together with the back of the bottoms, angling off those bottoms as necessary so no fabric is caught at the bottom of the placket. And when I get to the bottom of the placket, I pick up my presser foot and adjust the fabric so it's behind my presser foot, again, so I don't catch any extra fabric into these stitches. From there, I pull out any pleating threads that have gone over on the other side of that placket while it was being sewn, and then I iron the whole seam over. I trim it up so it's about 1/2 inch wide, and I fold over the raw edge about 1/4 inch, and then again about 1/4 inch or so until that folded edge is in line with the previous seam, and then I stitch that into place. You can do this by hand or machine. For now, I fold the placket in half and I stitch at the very bottom, angling off a bit. And this little bit of stitches gives some structure to the placket. They make a big difference, so do not skip them. So regardless of a gather bottom, a smocked, pleated for smocking bottom, or I guess a knife pleats or something else, now we need to sew up the side seams. And I do this using French seams, and I've got another video on my channel that goes over how to do a French seam. If you have gone the smocking pleat routes or the regular gather routes, you'll need to block the top of your bottom so they fit the bodice waist seam. Let the bodice guide you here. So to do that, pin the placket in place and then match up the side seams and pin those in place. And then pin the center front to center front. All the fixed pieces. This has to go here. Does that make sense? So now you can pull on your gathers or your pleating threads until the bottom fits the bodice. Does that make sense? I hope so. So then you can tie those threads off so the length is cinched down, and from there you can adjust your pleats or gathers until they are evenly distributed. If you went the gathering route, you can make sure they don't move around on you while sewing by either putting a ton of pins in or using that sew line glue pin, or I guess you could do both. But with the smocking pleats, sadly, my freezer paper did not do so well with the curvature. I know. I'm still not over it. It worked fine on the back of the garment, but the front curves are too drastic, and I learned this the hard way with this lilac blouse garment, and I ended up taking out the stitching here since it was, well, it left too much to be desired. So instead, I went back to the back smocking method, and that worked much better. Between back smocking and using the sew-line glue pen, this seam turned out great with some lovely pleats that are ready to be smocked. I also hand basted this seam before running it through my sewing machine. And take note here, as I'm hand basting this seam into place, I'm being careful to send my needle through at like a 90-ish degree angle to the fabric. I don't want to smudge my fabrics out of alignment as I'm basting. I mean, that's kind of the whole point, is to keep things tidy and in alignment as you're basting. So you just want to go stab through the fabric and stab through the other way and back and forth stabbing and not mushing the two pieces of fabric, out of alignment. I hope that's making sense as well. And since I learned my lesson the hard way on this lilac blouse, I placed 2 rows of back smocking on these other garments, and that worked out great. I didn't use the sew-line glue pen while assembling these, since the 2 rows of back smocking did the trick just fine. I hand basted that seam into place too, and then ran it through my sewing machine, and it turned out wonderfully. So, if you gathered your bottoms, go ahead and attach the bottoms to the bodice at the waist seam. Well, I guess it's more of an empire waist, but you get my drift. At the waist seam, okay? And you can see those are some lovely pleats. That is some Speckler Vogel satin Bodice here. It is some of my favorite fabric. It is so lovely, has this wonderful sheen. Love the colors. Anywho, squirrel. So yeah, clip the curves around the waist seam as necessary. Now we need to talk about finishing the bottom edge of your garment. If you have a dress, then you can put a wide fabric hem in. And to do this, I turned under the raw edge of the fabric about 1/4 of an inch all the way around and ironed that into place. Then I came back and applied a wide hem as marked by the pattern, or really however wide I feel like doing at that particular time. Come on now. I measure at one point, put a pin in, and measure a little ways over and put another pin in. And then I've got 2 points. I iron between the 2 points. 2 points make a line, so I call that square enough. I do this all the way around, and then that folded edge of this hem can either be sewn into place by a machine or by hand. So if you are rocking the romper, there are many ways this cookie can crumble, but one way is to finish the edges of the inseam. If you want to put closures in here for easy diapering access and such, then fold the raw edge over about 1/4 of an inch, and then again another 1/4 of an inch, or 3/8 of an inch, either is fine. And then top stitch that folded edge down into place. You'll repeat this for both the front and back of the romper. Next, you'll need to take up the extra fabric somehow, and there is a bit of fabric to account for here. So you can either put 2 rows of gathering stitches in, which is what I'm doing here for this garment, or you could put in some knife pleats in there or some elastic. But going the gathering route, you'll need some structure to secure those gathers down. In this case, I'm using a piping fabric strip combo. So I'm cutting the piping to length and sewing that into the bottom of the leg opening, making sure to leave some overhang of the piping so those raw edges can be concealed later on. So I pin that piping into place and stitch along at the seam allowance mark. And next I take that fabric band, fold it in half lengthwise, and stitch that along. I'll trim up this seam and then turn the fabric band around to conceal those raw edges. And you can see how those raw edges of the piping fabric band combo will get tucked in and hidden. and then the legs can be open via that inseam area. Add whatever snaps or button you'd like to use. Alternatively, you could just sew the inseam together as a permanent seam, but then you don't have access for the diapering thing. So, pros and cons. Another way to do the romper is with some elastic, and there's various ways to apply the elastic, but one route is to hem the bottom of the romper. So fold the bottom raw edge up twice, 1/4 inch iron and then another 1/4 inch iron, and then top stitch that folded edge into place. Once again, I am so sorry about my big old head. Just keeps getting in the way here, y'all. I'm off to have some humble pie next. I'm here all day, folks. So next I took a piece of elastic and tacked it down at one end with a few stitches, back stitching, forward stitching, you get the drift. Tacked her down, and then I stretched the elastic while stitching, and I pulled that quite hard. I continued until I got to the other side, and then I did another round of stitches to secure that down, forward, backwards, forwards, backwards, and voila. One route of doing elastic. Last but certainly not least is the bubble. To finish the bottom of the bubbles, you'll first sew the tab into place. So I fold the raw edge up about 1/4 inch and iron that into place, and then I fold the entire tab until it's flush with the garment, if you will. Glad y'all have a visual here. So I sew that folded edge into place, repeating the same thing for the other tab. It'll look something like this. Then those bubble legs need some elastic, which will require a casing. So I fold the raw edge up about 1/4 inch and iron that all the way around. And when I fold it into the tab, I have it angled something like so. And then I fold it up another 1/4 inch. Actually, 3/8 of an inch is a lot easier to feed the elastic through, and the difference is negligible for the fit of the garment. So yeah, do 3/8 of an inch and iron that into place, and then the tabs will be angled like so into a nice, neat little package, and then I stitch that folded edge into place. So to feed the elastic, I use a little safety pin to push the elastic through the casing. Friendly reminder here to watch at the end of the elastic so you sew it down into place instead of just pulling the whole sucker through, which is not fun. It's a good practice to leave about 1/4 inch of the elastic on the other side of those stitches so your wiggly baby does not bust through the elastic. After all the wiggles and the crawling and all that sort of stuff, the elastic can come apart. So that 1/4 inch is a good buffer there. And now continue to pull the elastic through and then stitch the other side of the elastic down. And voila, the bubble. So let's talk about some bonus content, shall we? So I have developed a love affair with organdy and lacework. It's been going on for about a year now, and I figure I should start to talk about the relationship some more, because I am not ashamed. Now, truthfully, I think organdy pairs so well with lacework. It is light and transparent, but it's also super sturdy, so it's just kind of the best of all the worlds. So I use it to finish off the inside of this lace bodice. I just cut another set of the front and back pieces, not on the fold though, and I use that as a guide for my lace work. I assembled this lace number using entredot in those seams. Again, I have another video that goes over how to do that. And check out this maneuver. So I need to finish that back up, but I don't want to cut into the lace, nor do I really want to sew into it, because having a seam there will distract. It will take, part of the lace design into the seam. So it'll be cut off. And I'm not about that either. So instead, I'm zigzagging between the lace and the organdy lining. So fun, right? So clever. I'm sure somebody else has done this in the world, but I just sort of got my way here, trying the sucker out, and I'm pretty happy with myself. I really like this maneuver right here, if I do say so myself. Anywho, I repeat the same thing for the other back section, and I also zigzag the raw edges of the organdy at the top, and I'll incorporate that into the neckline by hand later on. I'm also using the organdy to transfer the curves of the bodice onto the lace. I stitch the two together and then stitch the entredot on top of that using the previous stitches as a guide and trim that up, and voila, it is ready to accept the bottom options of the pattern. You like those hand mittens there? Throwback to wintertime here and my fashionable self. Goodness. So another neat option to have is a fully lined dress. And this is so simple. Seriously. Just cut another skirt set and this will be used as the lining. Here I'm using some white imperial batiste from Speckler Vogel. I joined the sides together using French seams as well as put a back placket, just the same as what we've previously gone over in this video. Then I put 2 rows of gathering stitches and pull up on the gathers until it fits the bodice lining. Once again, to fit it, I put the known points together, so center front to center front, side seams to side seams. You get the drift, same as before, and then I adjust the gathers as needed. And now I'm only going to sew that skirt lining to the bodice lining, leaving out all the garment outside pieces away, and voila, you have a fully lined dress. I love how full it is. And I machine stitch a wide hem onto the lining, like the skirt lining, and this dress is good to go. If you don't have a fully lined situation though, the best way to finish the inside of the garment is by hand, at least I think so. But to each their own, it is sewing, you do you. So to do this, I first stay stitch around the curves of the lining by machine, and then I clipped them a bit so they would turn nicely. I iron those curves into place and then I stitch them by hand. There are so many different options on this one, and I'm honored to dust off this design and then build up on some new options. If you have any questions, please put them down in the comments below and I will do my best to answer them. As always, I appreciate y'all for watching and I hope to catch y'all next time.